there. Today we are jumping into the additional forms that we need to include with our listing agreements. Now, these aren't disclosures that are made public to the buyer, but these are agreements made between the seller and Keller Williams Marquis and you as their agent. And it's just some additional information that we need on the front end of marketing so that we have the authorization to put the lockbox on, to gather some additional information about the property, utility companies, things like that. So I'm going to take you through these forms today, and we're going to jump in. The first form is the Maris Marketing Options form. So this form is not required unless if the property is active. I know there's an active choice here, but if the listing is going active, then this form is not required. However, if you are entering the listing as coming soon or withheld, this form is required. So that's why we're sharing it today. You would put in the date, the property address. The property would be listed with Keller Williams Marquis. And then the choices are active, and again, not required form if it's active, but if you are using this form or you've brought it with you or you've included it in your paperwork and you know it's going active, just go ahead and mark the active. That would be that according to the marketing remarks or marketing dates on the listing agreement, that when it goes active, it goes active. The coming soon is a different status in our Maris. So you would put the coming soon, and what that means is you can enter the property into the MLS and mark it as coming soon. It must be activated within 21 days, but during that coming soon status, it cannot be shown. If it is shown, or if an agent or the seller decides the seller decides they want to go ahead and have it shown, you have to pull it out of the coming soon status and put it in the active status so that it's available for anyone to see. So you just have to be super careful if you're in the coming soon status. It's fine to put a property in the coming soon status, but it cannot be shown. If it is shown, then it has to go active immediately. Then you have the withheld status. So the withheld status means that it's pretty much a private listing that can only be spoken about within the brokerage. It cannot be publicly marketed, and this you have to be super careful with. So this would require a conversation with me, please, if you are going to be putting a property in withheld status. Under the withheld status, the broker can share the listing with all agents and brokers within our office. They can share the listing directly with clients for this brokerage, Keller Williams Marquis, and they can market the listing through one-on-one communication with competing brokers or agents. However, under the withheld, I'm going to read this, the property cannot be publicly marketed. Okay, there's no sign in the yard, no distributing flyers, no mailers, no mass electronic communication, no Facebook marketing, no publicizing. And this could even be as simple as the owner, the seller, sitting on the bleachers in a public stadium and talking about their home being available for sale through Keller Williams Marquis. Anybody can overhear. That's public marketing. So this is why it's so important that if it's in the withheld status, that the seller knows they can't talk about it publicly, and that it's only spoken about and marketed through our own agency. So again, very strict on that withheld. The listing agent ID, the city, the number of bedrooms, this is just information about the property. And then the seller would sign, and then you sign as the listing agent. So once again, not required if it's in active status, although it can be filled out, not a problem, but definitely is required for either the coming soon or the withheld status. The other addendum or attachment with listing agreements is the listing property information sheet. This form is super important because it does go through the utility companies. And I'm going to go through line by line and provide some discussion here. The property address, the parcel ID number, you get that off the tax records, seller's name, if there's another seller, the other seller's name, the title company they choose to use. If they have an attorney, you can write that name in here. Most folks don't, but the title company is usually identified. If they want a home warranty plan, if they want to provide that, you put that information here, the company and the price. Property inclusions, you would have identified that property in the listing agreement, but you can repeat it here, whether it's the refrigerator and stove or the shed out back, whatever that may be. Property exclusions, if there are any, you'll want to include that information here. Again, usually we recommend that the seller remove anything they're planning to take with them so that there's no question or confusion about that with the buyer. So you come down to the utility companies. You'll want to ask the seller, and sometimes even you could ask them for their most recent bill. Not everybody has that in print anymore, so they may not even have that accessible. But you want the seller to identify the water company, the sewer company, the trash company, their electric provider, their natural gas provider, if they have one, their cable provider, fire protection, police protection. If they have propane, that provider. Do they lease the tank or do they own the tank? If they don't have propane, just put N/A. Satellite dish, if they have one, include that information here. If not, N/A. Aeration, that's the septic tank. So if they have a septic tank, then you'll want to identify the type of, if it's Norweco, if it's a tank, whatever it is. The last service date and who performed that service. And then we've got the age of the roof, the age of the HVAC, the age of the water heater. If there's a well, you'll need to include that information. If there's no well, put NA. Electric, the age of the service, if they know, not everybody knows. Sometimes, it could have been replaced in 2021, or it may be the original when the house was built in 1976. So not always a known, but put the year, the electric panel, if it's known. And then if it's fuses, you would put the amperage here, circuit breakers, the amperage here. If it's not fuses, put N/A. Most homes, there are some out there that still have fuses, but in general, you're going to have a circuit breaker. So is it 100 amp? Is it 200 amp? Some older homes that haven't been updated, they might be 60 amp. So you'll want to have the seller identify this information. And then whatever appliances they are including, the name of the appliance and the age, if they know it. Again, if they don't, like put refrigerator -unknown. If they do know the age, then they can put the age of that appliance here. The reason this is so important, for instance, there was a property sold and the seller thought that it was plumbing, it was sewer. And so they didn't have any septic information. The buyer didn't have a septic inspection because they thought it was sewer. And closed on the property, and a couple of months later, the septic overflowed, backed up. It was horrible. It was a lawsuit. The seller did not communicate that it was a septic system. So it would fall back on the seller, right? But if we as agents didn't have that identified, it's possible for that buyer to come back to the listing company, Keller Williams Marquis, for instance. And we don't want that, right? And you don't want a lawsuit. So to hit that head on, if we have the seller fill out this information, sign and date it, then it's according to what the seller has provided. So whether they say they make a mistake or they don't know and they give wrong information, This form with the seller's signature and date will take the information back to the seller and not to you as the agent or to Keller Williams Marquis. That's just one situation. So I had another situation where actually the seller identified the wrong water company, and my buyers closed on the house, and they had contacted the water company and ordered the transfer. It was a Friday because a lot of closings happen on Friday. It was a holiday weekend, and they had no water until Tuesday the next week because it was the wrong water company. You would hope the water company would have identified that, but unfortunately, the water company was also the sewer company, but there was another water company because this one was in one of those places where there were several providers. And so there was some confusion there. But it fell back to the seller's responsibility, not my responsibility as the buyer's agent or the listing agent's responsibility, because the seller had signed the document saying that it was the one company and it wasn't. So again, just important to have this information verified and that the seller sign and date it. Okay. Moving on, another attachment you want to include with your listings is loan information authorization. Now, a seller may own their property outright with no loan. It's still a good idea to have this form completed. If they have no mortgage on the property, no home equity or line of credit, you can put a line through this or leave it blank, and add a text box down here, no loan on the property, or property is not financed in any way, some kind of verbiage, and have the seller sign and date it. If there is, you can populate these fields for the seller to complete them. This is information that the title company will need when you get a contract on the house and they need to do the title search and get the mortgage payoffs and all of that. They're going to need this information. So this form is very helpful in order to provide to the title company once you do have a purchase contract on the house. So we do that on the front end then at the listing appointment. Either, again, mark through it or put down in a text box that there's no loan, have the seller sign and date it, or have the seller complete the information that is pertinent to the property that you're listing, and then have them sign and date it. We also include a lockbox authorization. So the lockbox authorization within the listing agreement, you probably remember there is in the seller agrees to paragraph, they agree to allow that lockbox on the property. They agree to allow the house to be shown. But we have a separate document to cover us. So basically you just put in the date, the marketing date, when that lockbox is going on the house. So the 28th day of June, located at, this would be the property address. The document states that the seller agrees to allow the lockbox to be placed on the house for agents or inspectors to access the property. That the seller consents to the use of the lockbox, and that they hold harmless, MLS, they hold harmless us. So it's dated, the seller signs, and then this witness signature, the broker signature, that's you, the listing agent. So you sign here. Now usually, well, I don't know, I shouldn't say usually. This page 2, if it's an owner-occupied seller property, then this page, the second page, isn't utilized usually. If it's rental property, this second page is used because the tenant needs to also agree to the lockbox being placed on the house. The only time it may be used if it's a seller-occupied home, say the seller has a live-in partner, and that live-in partner is not on the mortgage. They're not on the tax bill. They're not on the deed for the property, but they live there and they have personal belongings within the home. They may not pay rent, so they're not technically a renter or a lesser, but they have a personal interest of the items within the house, right? So if the house was opened up and somebody came into the house and somebody stole something, that live-in partner, if they don't sign the lockbox authorization, they could come back and say, well, I didn't agree to that. And they would have a valid case. So if there is a live-in partner, an adult child, somebody living in the home, not necessarily a tenant, but living in the home, an adult who has personal property within the house, you do want to get their signature on this document as tenant or lessee, even though they may not be paying rent, so to speak. So those are the attachments that we include with all listings. And you'll definitely want to make sure that you have this list of documents added to your listing agreement. Now, again, these documents are never shared with the public. Let me qualify that. This listing property information sheet, you can share that with your buyer. You can upload that with your disclosures. I've actually seen quite a few agents do that lately, because as a buyer's agent, it's your responsibility to help your buyers set up their utilities. And so that's where this information becomes obviously very useful. But the lockbox authorization, the loan authorization form, the MERIS form, those typically are not included in any of your listing documents that are publicized, of course. That is it for today. I hope you learned some things, and that maybe cleared up some confusion about any items on the attachments with the listing agreements. Thanks so much.